President Trump has a message for President Biden. Release the hostages, Joe. Take a look.
What they've done, and they ought to, you know what they ought to do? They ought to release the J6 hostages. They've suffered enough. They ought to release them. I call them hostages. Some people call them prisoners. I call them hostages. Release the J6 hostages, Joe. Release them, Joe. You can do it real easy, Joe. This guy, what he's done to people.
Trump's comments follow Biden bragging about the 840 total years in prison that January 6 defendants have been sentenced to serve under his DOJ.
Since that day, more than 1,200 people have been charged for their assault on the Capitol. Nearly 900 of them have been convicted or pled guilty. Collectively, to date, they have been sentenced to more than 840 years in prison. And what's Trump done? Instead of calling them criminals, he's called these insurrectionists patriots.
Friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald, weighed in on Biden's campaign message, writing on X, "It is bone-chilling to watch a U.S. president brag about locking up huge numbers of peaceful protesters, and Biden is simultaneously asking you to believe that he is the only hope for saving democracy."
Meanwhile, Tucker Carlson hosted Republican Representative Clay Higgins on his show, where Higgins made the unsubstantiated claim that the intelligence community entrapped those present at the Capitol on January 6th.
The involvement of certain actors, you could say deep state actors within the federal government, to set the stage for what happened in J4, 5, and 6, and to entrap thousands of Americans from across the country and lure them into this set stage on J4, 5, and 6. The people that were involved in that is quite a large web. So, yes, sir, we do have a great deal of evidence compiled, and we're gradually, professionally rolling that evidence out.
Over on MSNBC, host Jonathan Capehart spoke to a Capitol Police officer who served that day in 2021. Let's watch.
I'm going to try to get through this. Thank you for what you did 3 years ago today. Please tell me your thoughts on this third anniversary.
We are still in the midst of the same fight that began on January 6th, 2021. And we have a lot at stake in this country. And I think that it deserves every American's attention.
The family of Ashley Babbitt, who was shot and killed by Capitol Police, have filed a $30 million lawsuit against the federal government, claiming she was wrongfully killed. More footage from the moment she was shot reemerged on Twitter. Let's watch. All right, so looking at that video and reflecting on Tucker's guest referring to 1-6 protesters as entirely peaceful hostages does seem like a significant disconnect. Are they hostages of the government for peacefully breaking down a window, the other side of which were Congress members who they were articulating a desire to attack?
Sure, I have lots I could say about this. I take property destruction very seriously. I don't. You have the right to protest. You can't break down windows, fight with police, rampage across other people's property. So I absolutely think it is justified to bring charges against the people who did that. It was certainly not an entirely peaceful protest day. Now, there were thousands of people there protesting peacefully who have not been charged and shouldn't be, who were there participating in First Amendment protected activity. The sliver of people compared to the overall toll who broke the windows of the Capitol and went in were arrested, were prosecuted, and I think that's perfectly justified. I think treating it like a terrorist attack, as some of the prosecutors and some of the judges have, to give enhanced charges to people who weren't even there and are as if it was a masterminded and organized assault on democracy that merits these 20-year prison sentences for some leaders of the Proud Boys. I do find that that obscene. In terms of the kind of entrapment narrative that has become very popular among some right-wing commentators, the issue is, and there the guest of Tucker was right. I don't like when people say, we have all this evidence and we're going to unfurl it for you sometime in the future. We have all that evidence. It sounds a little bit like the alien stuff. Well, show it now. I want to see it now. Because, look, we do know that the FBI, that law enforcement, does engage in what people describe as entrapment all the time. This happens to happens to Muslim people online who get contacted by an FBI agent and said, would you like to purchase a bunch of weapons? And then they get terrorism charges. It happened in the alleged kidnapping of the Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmer, when it revealed that this right-wing militia that was organizing it, a number of those people were actually were paid FBI informants being paid to carry out the plot. So this kind of thing does happen. And also on January 6th, we've been told by a former chief of the Capitol Police, Stephen Sund, said that there were a number of federal agents among the protesters, which, again, would not be unexpected given that right-wing militia-type people often have informants and even agents among them. Now, what people have failed to show any evidence for is that the kind of rush on the Capitol was coordinated happened for non-spontaneous reasons. No evidence has been shown to suggest that. And that's where it kind of breaks down.
Here's my concern. Tucker Carlson and others are clearly in the midst of a reframing project to recharacterize what was a very embarrassing and ugly look for Republicans the day of 1/6. It was resurfaced over the weekend, the obvious anniversary of January 6th, that many people who now have postured and are positioning themselves as defenders of the rights of the people who were unfairly prosecuted on 1/6. I believe it was Vivek Ramaswamy who referred to them as hostages as well in a tweet over the weekend. People resurfaced a tweet that he had made immediately after January 6, 2021, where he said it was a shameful day for the Republican Party. So this is a revisionist history project that's ongoing by a number of actors, where I would agree with you, Robbie, and have agreed with you in the past, that I am anti-incarceration. I think that some of the sentences were punitive. I think that terrorism charges ratcheting up sentences are a problem. But let's remember who we're talking about. One of the longer sentences was a man named Peter Schwartz. He was sentenced to just over 14 years in prison. He was convicted of assault and civil disorder charges for throwing a chair at officers and spraying them with pepper spray. He had a prior criminal history of 38 felony convictions dating back to 1991. These are the kinds of people that are not being discussed as specifically by Tucker Carlson, but are being lumped into this broader framing of heroes and hostages, as though they should not be accountable for the kinds of crimes that, if we imagine, were done by, I don't know, a Black Lives Matter protester, would be framed very, very differently by this cohort.
Well, I know the conservative position is that a lot of Black Lives Matter protesting is protected activity, but that rioting and looting that took place during those protests was not dealt with
assault
sufficiently.
Against police officers.
You say someone with a history of 38 felonies. Yeah, I don't know who let this person out. I would have them still. I mean, under a conservative thinking, they shouldn't be out there anyway. But I mean, we're not really disagreeing here. People should face the consequences for the actions they took on that day. It should not be rebranded in the imagination as something that was, unless there's evidence. If there's more evidence that it was like, an inside job or the deep state or whatever these people are claiming, let's actually see that evidence. We should not uncritically accept everything law enforcement any law enforcement sources tell us. And in fact, all the law enforcement sources are disagreeing because they want to blame each other for what's happening. Some of the Capitol Police leaders say, oh, we wanted to call in the National Guard and we got thwarted by this agency, and this agency saying, no, you had all the security you needed. And so it can be hard to make heads or tails of who's actually responsible. But that doesn't mean we're not allowed to ask questions about the extent of what went on and why it happened. But if people are going to make claims, they have to back it up with evidence.
And what about Tucker Carlson's claims about the broad claim that the people who were convicted of crimes on a 1/6, broadly speaking, should be characterized as hostages as opposed to convicted felons?
If Trump felt that way, he could have pardoned them all. He had ample time to do so, and many conservatives were calling on him to do just that. And instead, they languished in prison for a man who doesn't care about them. Now he says he does because he knows that riles up the base and brings some more of that attention to Trump. But the reality is he didn't do anything for those people when he could have. And so people should be a little skeptical of who will in the future.
And I think Trump is right that there would be a pretty weird optic battle happening for the party that says that they're the ones that respect law enforcement and law and order to pardon someone like Robert Palmer, who was sentenced to 5 years for throwing wooden boards and a fire extinguisher at police officers that were guarding the Capitol, or Julian Cotter, who got more than 6 years after pepper spraying a police officer in the face, among other charges.
Yeah, you'll never find me saying that someone who feuded with police in that way should be let
physically
off
attacked,
they should go,
assaulted police officers.
They should be in jail. We should jail more people involved in violent crime. It's actually a huge problem in this city. D.C., unlike every other major city right now, is suffering from a massive crime problem. The crime trends have reversed in all the other cities, going back the way we expect them to, and not
so
here.
much of it happened. These violent criminals on 1/6 were a part of that right here in Washington, D.C. So that's the subject of this segment. Stick around. We'll have more for you coming up next.
Well, we managed to talk about that without even shedding any tears, Brianna. How interesting. More rising, as she said, right after this.